In a world where power struggles rarely manifest in direct confrontations, modern geopolitics unfolds through strategic silences, unstable alliances, and calculated decisions. The relationship between the United States, Iran, and Europe is a clear example of this new landscape. A scenario influenced by historical tensions, economic sanctions, energy risks, and military dilemmas that shape the posture of major powers. In recent months, this axis has returned to the center of attention, not only due to internal movements in Iran, but also because of the repercussions on European security and the American role as a global actor. Understanding why Washington avoided a direct attack on Iran and what this choice reveals about the future of security in the West is essential to understanding the current moment and its strategic implications. Throughout this video, we will decipher this panorama with clarity and context. If you value serious and straightforward analysis of what's really happening in the world, please like and subscribe to the channel. This greatly strengthens the channel and helps me bring content that doesn't usually appear in traditional media. Also, let us know where you're watching from. Now let's understand this whole situation. As we examine the relationship between the United States and Iran over the past few decades, it becomes clear that it is not merely a confrontation between two countries, but an ongoing process involving ideology, security, energy, diplomacy, and geopolitical positioning. To understand the current scenario, it is important to go back to the end of the 1970s, when the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Western-aligned monarchy and inaugurated a new regime with a strong religious identity and an anti-American stance. This period marked the diplomatic rupture between Washington and Tehran, and since then the two countries have ceased to have direct relations, conducting their interactions mainly through public speeches, intermediaries, and economic pressure. Throughout the Cold War, Iran sought to consolidate its new political project, while the United States attempted to prevent the emergence of hostile regimes in a region strategically important for energy supply. Over time, the rivalry deepened, especially due to incidents involving diplomats, regional interests in the Gulf, and growing distrust of the Iranian nuclear program. In the decades that followed, the relationship transformed into an indirect confrontation marked by economic sanctions, cyber operations, harsh rhetoric in official speeches, and support for regional allies. Sanctions became one of the main American tools for pressuring Iran, affecting sectors such as energy, finance, and international trade. At the same time, there were episodes of cyber attacks against nuclear facilities, interpreted by analysts as attempts to delay Iranian technological advancement without resorting to classic military force. This combination of measures reinforced the idea that, even without a declared war, the two countries were engaged in a continuous dispute for regional dominance and political survival. For the American public, understanding this history is not just a matter of memory, but a way to understand why present decisions seem so calculated and cautious. If you've been following this topic so far, comment with the word context, so we know that this type of analysis is making sense to you and to support the channel. As time went on, attention turned to the possibility of a direct confrontation, but any serious analysis needs to consider the military capabilities involved, and above all, the risks of regional escalation. Iran has developed air defense systems that, while not equivalent to the most advanced Western models, represent a considerable barrier to offensive operations. Furthermore, the country has invested in a type of military capability called asymmetric warfare, which consists of using low-cost, high-impact methods such as drones, short and medium-range missiles, and support for allied groups in the region. These tools create significant uncertainty for any attack, as they make calculating a response more difficult and increase the chances of indirect retaliation. Another essential point for understanding this equation is the map of the Persian Gulf. There lies the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow maritime passage through which a significant portion of the oil that supplies the global market circulates. If this channel were blocked during a conflict, the effects would be felt in energy prices, regional stability, and Western economies. Furthermore, U.S. allies such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain possess bases, pipelines, and population centers that could be targeted in case of retaliation. An attack against Iran could therefore trigger a chain of events that evolves rapidly and uncontrollably. This is the concept of regional escalation, a conflict that begins locally but expands to other areas and actors, becoming difficult to contain without high costs. Within this context, any military decision needs to consider not only the initial victory, but what happens the day after. Analysts often point out that conflicts of this type rarely end with a single attack and often evolve into prolonged occupations, political instability, and costly reconstructions. The United States' experience in Iraq and Afghanistan demonstrated how operations that seem quick at the beginning can turn into lengthy and costly commitments. This lesson is not ideological, but historical, and forms part of the military calculation when the subject is Iran. Another crucial point explaining the more restrained stance of the United States lies in the human, economic, and political costs of direct conflict. Wars are not merely disputes between armies. They involve the displacement of people, destruction of infrastructure, impacts on public opinion, and pressure on national budgets. In the American case, the country recently emerged from lengthy campaigns in the Middle East and South Asia that consumed enormous resources and generated internal debates about the role of the United States in the world. This history has reduced the appetite of the population and part of the political class for new extensive conflicts. Meanwhile, from an economic standpoint, the United States would need to consider the effects on the global energy market, which directly influences the cost of living and essential sectors of the economy. Furthermore, there is the internal political factor. American presidents and congressmen face frequent election cycles and make decisions under public and media scrutiny. A war that begins without solid support can generate immediate wear and tear and compromise future elections. And even when there is initial support, prolonged conflicts tend to erode political approval over time. Therefore, any military operation must take into account not only external strategy, but also internal reaction. This set of variables helps explain why, even in moments of high tension, Washington has opted for alternatives to attack. If you're following this analysis and it's adding clarity to the topic, please comment with the word costs, so we know this format is helpful and to strengthen the channel's community. When we observe the behavior of the United States towards Iran, we realize that the country has a range of options that do not necessarily involve the direct use of military force. Economic sanctions are a clear example of this. By restricting access to markets and financial systems, Washington seeks to alter Iranian behavior without resorting to bombs or troops. This type of action has a lasting impact, affecting the target country's domestic economy and generating pressure on its government. Another instrument is cyber warfare, a form of digital attack aimed at harming industrial systems, power grids, or specific programs. The use of this resource avoids the high cost and international visibility of a physical attack, although it is often not publicly acknowledged. In addition to these mechanisms, the United States also acts through covert operations, which are clandestine actions conducted by intelligence agencies or regional partners. These operations may include sabotage, espionage, and the collection of strategic information. Added to this is cooperation with allies such as Israel and Saudi Arabia, countries that see Iran as a regional competitor and have their own security interests. At the diplomatic level, Washington also uses multilateral forums such as the United Nations and negotiates with the European Union to maintain a unified front of pressure, even when there are differences between allies. Finally, there is an often ignored internal dimension that profoundly influences Iran's external behavior: the domestic scenario. In recent decades, the country has faced waves of protests motivated by factors such as the economy, civil rights, and political issues. These demonstrations have challenged the legitimacy of the government and shown that there is an internal debate about the country's future. When a regime faces internal contestation, an external attack can trigger two opposing outcomes. In some cases, the population may unite around the government against what is perceived as foreign aggression. In other cases, it may accelerate processes of fragmentation and instability. For the United States, this uncertainty adds an extra component to the strategic calculation, as any intervention needs to consider how it would alter not only Iran's external behavior, but also its internal cohesion. Understanding this dynamic makes it clear why major powers exercise caution when dealing with situations of this nature. Iran is not a geographically isolated country. It borders several Middle Eastern nations, is close to crucial energy routes, and has political influence over groups and allies in the region. This means that any internal change can reverberate beyond its borders, affecting allies and rivals alike. For Washington, therefore, assessing Iran goes far beyond comparing arsenals. It involves understanding a complex ecosystem of actors, interests, and consequences. When examining why the United States avoided a direct attack on Iran, a picture emerges that combines strategic, diplomatic, and domestic factors. The decision was not made in a vacuum, but within a complex international environment where military actions have effects that extend far beyond the battlefield. One of the central elements was the risk of regional military escalation. Escalation is a term used to describe when a limited conflict grows and involves new actors, territories, or weapons, making it more difficult to control. In the case of Iran, an American attack could trigger responses from groups allied to Iran in the Middle East, affecting countries such as Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and the Gulf. These groups, known as proxies, are organizations that act in alignment with Iranian interests, creating a scenario in which the response to an offensive might not come directly from Tehran, but from various points in the region, making the war diffuse and unpredictable. Furthermore, there was a direct risk to American bases and allies. Several Gulf countries possess military and commercial infrastructure that could be targeted by missiles, drones, and sabotage. The region is home to crucial shipping lanes, including the Strait of Hormuz, which handles a significant portion of global oil transport. An attack could result in the closure of this waterway, impacting the international energy market and increasing costs for the West. For Washington, such a calculation involves considering whether the immediate military benefit would outweigh the political, economic, and human risks. And unlike previous conflicts, uncertainty was high. There was no guarantee that an attack would reduce Iranian influence, nor that regional tensions would cease. Another crucial aspect was the strategic cost-benefit. American authorities needed to weigh whether an attack would truly alter Iran's behavior, or merely reinforce its defensive posture and internal rhetoric against foreign interference. There are precedents in the region where military actions have ultimately strengthened politically weakened regimes by creating a narrative of national resistance. This is also relevant in the Iranian case, as external pressure can increase the regime's internal cohesion, at least temporarily. Internally in the United States, there was also the political factor. After long campaigns in the Middle East, such as Afghanistan and Iraq, the American public became more cautious about protracted wars. Congress also showed less appetite for authorizing new conflicts that could consume significant resources and strain domestic politics. Instead of opting for military intervention, Washington chose diplomatic and economic measures, such as sanctions and multilateral negotiations, with the goal of pressuring Iran without going to war. If this analysis is clear to you so far, comment with the word escalation to support the channel's work and strengthen our community of people interested in geopolitics. These American decisions were not confined to the borders of the United States. They had a direct impact on the European landscape, especially on a sensitive point: energy. Europe is partially dependent on oil and natural gas from the Middle East, and any instability in the region affects its supply and prices. This has become very evident in various crises since the end of the last century. A war involving Iran could disrupt energy flows, raise costs for consumers and industries, and trigger a chain reaction in the European economy. Furthermore, episodes of war in the Middle East have historically provoked migratory movements. Recent conflicts in Syria and Iraq have led millions of people to seek refuge on the European continent, putting pressure on reception systems, urban infrastructure, internal policies, and political parties. Europe has become particularly sensitive to these flows, as its institutions are still dealing with the social and political effects of this dynamic. Another important aspect is the vulnerability of critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is the set of systems essential for modern life, such as energy, transportation, food supply, and communications. Europe has energy-intensive industries, such as steel, chemicals, and automotive, which depend on stable supplies and predictable prices. A conflict affecting shipping routes or production facilities could reduce supply and increase costs, decreasing competitiveness and affecting jobs. Furthermore, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, known as NATO, which brings together the United States, Canada, and several European countries, would be pressured to take a position in the event of a conflict involving Washington. This pressure arises because the treaty provides for collective defense mechanisms, meaning that an attack against an ally may require consultation and coordination. While this does not automatically oblige entry into war, it creates significant diplomatic tensions and could divide the bloc at a delicate time. Given this scenario, an important question for international debate is how Europe reacts when the United States opts for containment instead of direct intervention. The answer involves the theme of strategic autonomy, an expression that has gained strength in European discourse in the last decade. Strategic autonomy refers to the ability of a continent or country to act independently on security and defense issues, without depending entirely on another actor. In practice, the debate within the European Union revolves around the possibility of creating or strengthening joint armed forces, expanding investments in the arms industry, and unifying diplomatic decisions. However, there are important limitations. Europe is a diverse set of states with different histories, economies, and perceptions of threat. Countries like France and Germany advocate greater military integration, while others prefer to maintain the main link with the United States through NATO. This means that strategic decisions take time and require internal consensus. In addition to these difficulties, the European Union still depends on the United States for specific military capabilities, such as advanced intelligence, strategic logistics, and missile defense. These areas require long-term investments in advanced technology, making them difficult to replace quickly. Therefore, even when Europe discusses greater autonomy, it tends to maintain the transatlantic link as a central piece of the continent's security. At the same time, European leaders understand that the world is undergoing changes, with new centers of power emerging in Asia and increasing disputes between major powers. This puts pressure on Europe to rethink its foreign policy, its projection capacity, and its role in the international system. European diplomacy also seeks to balance the relationship with the United States and Iran, participating in agreements and attempts at negotiation regarding the Iranian nuclear program, as occurred in the agreement signed during the last decade. If this explanation of European dynamics made sense to you, comment with the word Europe to show that you value in-depth analysis and to help the channel grow. Upon reaching the final part of this analysis, it is possible to synthesize the factors that explain why the United States chose not to attack Iran and what the implications of this choice were. On the American side, decisive factors included the risk of a broader regional conflict, the possibility of harming allies and strategic bases, uncertainty about the real effects of an offensive, a preference for diplomatic and economic pressure, and internal political limitations after decades of activity in the Middle East. On the European side, the American decision impacted energy, security, migration flows, diplomacy, and internal debates on defense. This scenario shows how decisions made in Washington reverberate far beyond the territory of the United States, influencing economic structures, political institutions, and international alliances. In terms of the future, there are several possible paths. One is continued containment, with the United States maintaining sanctions and diplomatic pressure. Another involves negotiation, if the parties are willing to restore multilateral agreements and reduce tensions. There is also the possibility of prolonged competition, in which neither side yields, keeping the Middle East as a stage for indirect disputes. Europe, in turn, will need to decide to what extent it wishes to develop greater strategic independence or maintain its security predominantly anchored in NATO and American support. Issues such as energy security, military stability, and international alliances will remain at the center of this debate. For the American public interested in geopolitics, understanding these connections helps contextualize why a military attack, although technically possible, was not considered the best option in such an interconnected and sensitive scenario. Analyzing this scenario, it becomes clear that strategic decisions shape not only the region, but also the future of international relations. Nothing is resolved, and the coming months could be decisive. If you want to follow this story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and if you've made it this far, comment, "I'm watching." And now the next video is on screen. The Iranian regime may be on the verge of collapse, but the United States needs to act now. I'll see you there.